your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt, back for another episode. And Matt, this week we have demonic daughters. And as someone who has daughters, I find this category very interesting because you know, especially that father-daughter relationship, it's just such a sweet and innocent expectation and the image that you have in your head. And then I think to completely rip that apart and tear that upside down is even all the more impactful because of that.
Yeah, our children represent the future and hope for our civilization. And we have this chance to take something pure and perfect with our children and continue to hopefully ignite their grace into the world and make it a better place. And when that glimmer of hope and innocence becomes corrupted at such a young age, there's almost no greater horror for a parent to have to witness. And so I think this topic hits home for almost every viewer. And even if you're not a parent, we were all children at once. And so there's something we can relate to that as being corrupted at such a young age.
Yeah, the idea of sugar and spice and everything nice getting completely upended into blood and gore and a whole lot more or something, it's just, that dichotomy is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're going to start with one of the absolute power, top of the list horror films of all time.
Yeah.
It's definitely on the Mount Rushmore, and some people will consider it the greatest horror movie ever made. And that's The Exorcist from 1973, directed by William Friedkin. And, everyone knows The Exorcist, right? That's how old were you when you first saw this movie?
I saw bits and pieces of it when I was younger, when I was a teenager, but I never watched the whole movie. I actually didn't watch it for the first time until I think like 5 years ago. That's when I actually sat down and watched the whole thing. So I had, walked in the room and seen it here and there, but to actually sit down and pay attention to the whole thing was only like 5 years ago. So I do consider it one of the greatest horror movies of all time because when I sat down and watched it, from front to end, I had an appreciation for it for how impactful it was. Not because of its gore or the jump scares or anything like that. It was really just the subtle use of an increasingly dark and eerie atmosphere that just kind of seeps through every scene. And they do that with a lot of subliminal tricks with sound and blipping in visuals. And for its time, even for now, I think it was just extraordinarily creative.
That's an excellent point because, when we rewatch these movies, often my wife watches them with me, and she's always like, sometimes she's like, we're watching an old movie again. She prefers the more modern, right? I like the old. I
like both. Yeah, I like the plethora, right?
But she maybe doesn't have an appreciation for Freaks from 1932 the way I do.
Right.
But this movie, we're watching it, and it's like, this movie could be 2 years old. Like, it's so crisp. It's so, the production values are so great and everything is so executed perfectly. Like this really is it's 50 years old. Just this past Christmas, it hit 50 years old.
It's crazy.
And it's still darn near perfect.
Yeah, even when you're watching that opening scene when they're in Iraq, it was originally shot in like a 35 millimeter, but when you're watching that opening scene when it was like remastered, like you can just see like it looks like a modern movie. It looks like it was shot, like you said, a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. And I watched it on, I have the DVD that I've had for years and years and years, and it's labeled as the version you've never seen. So it's got some edits and some tweaks and some updates. So I never wanted to get rid of that version because I like having that additional footage. And I think it's a great version, even though the tweaks are minor. But, having these discussions over the years, being a horror fan my whole life, so many people have asked me, what's the scariest movie you've ever seen? Since I was 12 years old and saw this movie, my answer's never changed. And to this day, it hasn't.
Yeah.
And maybe, I thought about this when I was rewatching this. Maybe, I was brought up as a young child. I was brought up in the Catholic church, and because of that, everything about this movie feels real. It doesn't feel like, people from outer space or vampires or zombies. It feels real, and they take so much time building the world and building the characters. Father Karras, and the mother, and like there's depth to it, and it just feels so darn real.
Yeah, and it's the evil is gonna the evil is coming from within the individual. Like there's nowhere to run from this, right? Like you're in your home with your family, and it's still gonna happen. There's nothing you can do,
Yeah,
right? And so there's nowhere to run from it. Like
yeah,
it's just infecting you. And then you have like you have like Damien, who's just kind of like he's struggling with his faith, and he's a beer drinking, cigarette smoking priest, and he's
hmm
like, I don't know, man. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
and so yeah, it has this like real emotional depth to it. Like everyone's just kind of trying to. The doctors are like, well, we don't know either. Like maybe try an exorcist.
yeah.
Like everyone's struggling with their faith, whether it's a scientific basis or a religious basis, and like the mother. Chris, she's just like pleading for someone to help her, and her acting everyone's acting is phenomenal in this movie. That's another thing. It's good dialogue, it's good script, it's great editing, it's great cinematography. It's 10 across the board.
Let's not forget. Again, this is over 50 years old. Uh, the makeup work of Dick Smith is just every possession movie, every exorcist movie, every demonic movie in the last 50 years is going to be held up to this as a comparison because it is perfect.
Yeah, and you have a child in a bed, and the bed is levitating. I mean, every time you have a possession movie, like you said, it's a child in the bed. It's like, well, Exorcist did that first, and they did it perfect,
Yeah,
right? Like we need a child and a lazy boy for the next one. They've got to do something different.
on a teeter totter, anything.
Yeah, it's something different because when you see the exorcism in the bed with the child, it's been overdone, and it's all because of this movie.
We're going to walk through the plot quickly. Most people are probably familiar with this, but there's some touch points I want to hit on here that really speak to the impact of this movie. We start with Father Marin on an archaeological dig in Iraq, as you mentioned. He uncovers a small idol, and then back at the dig site, we see a beautifully framed shot of him on a little rock ledge, the sun behind it, and a full size statue of this demonic presence, and it's just lit beautifully, it's framed beautifully, it's impactful. It's nothing. It's a statue, and it's impactful.
Yeah, it feels like it's emerging towards him, even though it's not moving, and it's partly because you can see like the rustling wind whistling towards him with the light kind of glimmering and dancing in the background to give it this, feeling that there's some kind of movement going on, like they're facing off, and it's like you said, it's very impactful.
We see a lot of movies nowadays with the quick cuts and the high speed and the frenetic action, and there's merit to that. I'm not discounting that type of movie, but this movie's different, where it'll just frame that scene and let it sink in for a second.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so beautifully done.
Yeah, it does that throughout this movie. It's not trying to jump scare you. It wants everything to seep in.
And we see the Georgetown area of Washington, D.C. Actress Chris and her 12-year-old daughter Reagan are moving into a brownstone, beautiful area of Georgetown. Chris is shooting a film in the area, and they're having a house built, so they're going to be here for a while. This is home for a while. We also meet Father Karras, who's a priest and a psychiatrist in the area. And as you mentioned, he has a sick mom. He doesn't have the money to properly help her, and he's losing his faith. His faith is suffering through kind of the negativity in his life.
Yeah, and it shows right away. Like he's kind of like he has this like sullen look to him. He's not like a up and cheery like faith be with you. Like he's kind of like right away.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, can I bum a smoke?
Yeah,
yeah, and again, I don't know this actor from any other film. He couldn't have played this role any more perfectly.
yeah, I agree.
We see Reagan in the basement playing with an Ouija board. At night, she gets in bed with Chris and reports her bed won't stop shaking. And she goes for a checkup and she's acting very odd. She's lashing out. She's rude. And we've seen some scenes with Chris and Reagan together, and they have what seems to be a fantastic relationship. Chris is a wealthy actress, so she has caretakers and helpers around the house, but she really takes time with her daughter. They really have a rapport and an exchange and a depth of relationship that's shown before everything goes haywire, which is something, and again, other movies might not take the time to build that relationship.
Yeah, checking in with her when she's playing with the stuff in the basement, like you said, or tucking her in at night, and they have these like sweet moments where she's kissing her on the forehead, and they're talking about what they're gonna do the next day, and we're gonna have a fun day at the park and go here and there, and you can see that they have this very special relationship.
And it's not syrupy, it's not over the top, it's natural. It's a working mother who loves her daughter and a daughter who loves her mother. It's so naturally presented. It's not like shoved in your face. Hey, look how good these people get along.
It seems genuine.
It's just life. Yeah, genuine.
Yeah.
Perfect word. So they prescribe Reagan Ritalin and send her home. We see Karras's mom ends up in a hospital, a low grade hospital, because no one can afford anything better, and she unfortunately dies. So we see the emotional impact on this character. We don't yet know how he ties into the story, but we're getting to know more about him and feel for his plight. Chris has a party at her home, and Reagan comes down in the middle of the party, and she says, "You're going to die." And then she just wets right in the middle of the floor. And she's 12 years old. She's not 3 or 4 where something disturbed her in the middle of the night. Very unusual. Again, impactful because of her reaction and the reaction of the party goers. There's a sympathetic awkwardness to everybody, like, oh boy, I can't believe this is happening type of thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to utilize any jump scares or anything like that. It actually has this genuine shot to it, like what would happen if you had to experience this, right? And it's just she's very like deadpan when she comes downstairs and says it, and it kind of like puts a halt to the music, and everyone's like, "What's going on?"
Yeah. She Linda Blair is. We talk a lot on this show about child actors and actresses who just blow our minds with their quality of work. She's incredible in this movie.
She should have won an Oscar for it.
Yeah, truly. I was reading about her when she came to the tryout, and obviously this is a sensitive movie to work with a lot of sensitive areas for a 12-year-old girl. And they asked her if she understood some of the things, and she's like, and her response was, "Yeah, I read the book." And they're like, "Oh, you understand some of these things?" And she's like, particularly they talk about the masturbation scene, and she's like, "Yeah, I understand it, don't you?" Like, and it was just like, okay, she's Reagan. There's no more rehearsals or looking for anybody else. This girl has it,
which is also impressive that a girl her age would read that book.
That's I'm like, well, you probably shouldn't have read that book. My first thought.
Right.
She ends up back in bed, and the bed starts thrashing with her in it, just shaking, and she's flying violently around. It's just crazy. And again, it's a simple thing, but it's handled so perfectly. There's no CGI. It's mechanical, physical effects, and it just has such a good impact.
Yep.
They send her to more doctors. Reagan lashes out at them. She does not want to be treated. You can start to see an actual physical transformation in Reagan at this point. Her face becomes a little puffier. Her eyes become a little more sunk in. It's subtle, and it's just Dick Smith being brilliant.
Yeah, and it's just the eyes squint with a little bit more evil and like scorn, like when she looks at people. Yeah.
Her hair's an extra level of disheveled. It's just
Yeah,
so many little things.
yeah, even if it's slightly like kind of like the bangs are kind of more like rough off to the side, and she squints with that scorn at someone. You're like, wait a second, that wasn't Reagan from the opening scene. That was all sweet. Yeah, you start to see it. Yeah.
Yep. They perform extensive medical procedures, MRI of the brain. It shows nothing. The doctor actually comes and visits her at home. She's thrashing around, speaking in a deep voice that's no longer her own. She's saying vulgar things and actually attacks the doctor. And they sedate her and send her for more tests. It's like this vicious cycle, and it's not dragged out. It's not the pacing of the movie for a 2 hour plus movie. Never really suffers. It's important things. Show it, move on, talk about it,
Yep.
move to the next thing. But you do get the trope that's now in every movie like this is, probing with the medical science until you can't explain it, which is where we get to.
Right, right. And also, from the 70s standpoint of view, like you have to look at the social commentary of like just sending them back to the doctors and trying to, oh, well, we're gonna throw drugs at this person. We're gonna just throw this at that person. There was no deep analysis for a lot of these things. Like we're talking 50 years ago, and they were just like, yeah, we're gonna throw Ritalin at her. That's the answer. And we
Yeah.
saw what an epidemic that became in like the 90s, 2000s, and so it was an interesting social commentary when you look back on it.
And it is really ahead of that wave, really.
Exactly? It's 20 years ahead of it.
If you look at the MRI machine, you're like, oh my God, what is that?
Right.
Is that an old microwave? Like, oh no, that's an MRI machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Back at home, they leave her under the guidance of Burke, who is the director of the film that Chris is shooting, and a friend. She's in bed, and he's alone there with her, and she's just in bed. It should be fine, except when they get home, no one's there, and Burke is found dead at the bottom of the long steps below their brownstone. And initial speculation is that he was drunk, because he's known to be a drunk, and fell down the steps. Except we find out more information later that makes that seem implausible.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, the man's dead.
Right.
While they're downstairs discussing it, Reagan does the famous reverse spider walk down the steps and spits blood everywhere.
It's still an impressive scene to me to this day, actually.
It's very impressive. They hired a gymnast and contortionist, and she did it without the aid of any wires or harnesses or anything, and did it in one take.
That just brings the authenticity to it.
The original version actually shows, instead of her spitting up this blood, she actually sticks out a lizard tongue.
Mm.
And in the revision, they changed it to her just spitting out this deep red blood, which I think the blood is better.
I do too. Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny how those little tweaks are made over the years.
Well, they show later when she's on the bed and she's like the priests are trying to perform the exorcism. she has like the long tongue so I think they utilize that at some point in the movie, anyways.
Yeah. Lieutenant Linderman is investigating Burke's death, and we see him talking to Karras. He's looking for, do you know a priest that might be wanting to do something like this. We see a psychiatrist come visit Reagan, and she makes pictures fall in the room and attacks him. And then we see what you kind of talked about, a big group of doctors meeting with Chris, and she is frustrated and angry because they have no answers. They have no ideas.
Yeah.
And now when we see Reagan, we see her face has scratches on it, and her lips are like desert dry and cracked. And she's really begun this transformation. She looks awful. And one doctor of the group finally does suggest exorcism.
Yeah, he thinks it's all psychological. He was like, listen, the exorcism isn't real. He's like, but her state of mind is real. Like, she believes that she's being possessed, so we have to use that against her by bringing in an exorcist to perform this theatrical, to have the theatrics there to convince her that she can get better. And he's like, so it's kind of a form of like stage therapy.
Yeah.
And so he
Power of
doesn't actually
suggestion. We're gonna
He's
take
like,
your power of suggestion and run with it, but solve it at the same time.
right.
Kinderman shows up at the home and questions Chris, and he thinks Burke was thrown from Reagan's window to his death, and he doesn't believe he fell down the stairs because his head was completely turned backwards on his body, and they believe the odds of that happening in the fall were 1 in 1,000. They think his head was ripped, turned backwards, and then he was thrown out the window. That's his working theory.
Which would make sense. Your head wouldn't turn completely backwards from falling down steps, right?
You'd have to, yeah. So Chris goes into Reagan's room, and here's where it really starts to go. Things are flying around. There's books. It's like you're in a wind tunnel. And Reagan is on the bed, jamming herself in the crotch with a cross.
Yeah.
And she's saying profanities.
It's blood going everywhere. It's
blood
pretty violent.
flying.
Yeah.
It's a shocking scene today.
Mm-hmm.
It was unbelievably shocking and cutting edge in 1973.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
This is where people started passing out and being ushered out of the theater.
They're like, "What is going on? This is only halfway through the movie."
You know, the just the level of sacrilege involved in this scene is enough to just make some people lose their mind.
Right. It was NC-17 back then, right? It was like, we can't even rate this.
Yeah. She grabs her mother's head and sticks it between her legs and is yelling in this demonic voice, "Lick me." It's I don't care how old it is. It's disturbing.
It's very disturbing. Yeah.
She then takes her mother and throws her against the wall. And this scene actually was one of the cursed scenes of the film, where she actually broke her tailbone. They threw her against the wall so hard to make this scene. She had a broken coccyx and was on crutches for 2 weeks. They had to pause shooting.
Oh, wow.
So the pain on her face, you think she's a great actress? Well, she may be, but it was really real.
That was real. Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot of issues that happened with this film of this movie, wasn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a great special on Shudder called
I was going to say
Cursed Films, and they do an in-depth on this, and it's fascinating. I would recommend it.
Yep.
Chris finally meets Father Karras and asks him to do the exorcism. And he goes to the house to meet Reagan and see what he sees. She's tied to the bed. There's the famous scene where she spits the green pea soup vomit on him. And it's another cool thing about this scene. It was supposed to hit him across the shirt, across the chest, and the projection tubes were misaligned. So when it hits him in the face and mouth, his surprise is also very genuine because he was not prepared for that.
I'd like to believe in situations like that where the director secretly said, "Listen, we're going to tell everyone this is going to hit him in the chest. Go ahead and hit him in the face."
Yeah. Yeah, and you get that genuine reaction that you get. It was perfect. She speaks in tongues. He's recording her, and the words "help me" are protruding and written from the inside of her stomach.
Yeah, which also becomes a trope in these types of movies.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen it now 100 times.
100 times. Yeah.
Karras goes to the church to request an exorcism, and they decide they're going to bring in Father Marin, who we met at the opening, as an experienced person to perform this exorcist, while Karras assists. As soon as they walk in the house, Reagan reacts strongly. As soon as Marin arrives, they go in the room, and it's ice cold. You can see everyone's breath. And this was achieved by actually purchasing a $50,000 unit that turned the room into like a freezer, which is like $280,000 in today's money, $250,000 to achieve the effect of the cold room. But the other thing it did was the cameras couldn't shoot in temperatures that cold for more than like 3 minutes at a time. So they had to keep stopping. warm the cameras up and restart the shooting, which was really committed to that. They said they could have added the breath after in post effects, but Friedkin wanted it real.
Yeah, and when you watch it, you get that sense because you're sitting there wondering, like, how are they doing this? This looks really real. Like, it looks like it's coming out of their mouth. It looks like everything just looks cold. It looks like it's coming out of their mouth, and you're sitting there trying to figure it out. But it's just you're also just so indulged into the movie that you're not even. A part of you is trying to like analyze it, but another part of you is just like engrossed in the movie because it looks so real, and it is.
Yeah. So they spent a lot of money to make that. And it's like you said, that's exactly what it looks like. Every breath, every inhale, because it is real. Reagan's bed raises. It's flying around. She's shouting profanity. She has the serpent tongue. She has the pea soup leaking from her mouth. Things are breaking.
The sounds of groaning pigs and bees and stuff like that, and then all of everything they have with the special effects. It's all combined.
Yeah. It's a whirlwind at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where her head does a complete 360 on her body, which just blew people's mind. And it's a phenomenal effect, and it looks great today.
Yeah.
She starts to torment Karras over leaving his mom in the crappy hospital. And as I remember as a kid saying, wow, this demon knows these things. It must be real.
Right.
Like it adds that, like, how would Reagan know these facts and details about his dead mother?
Yeah. And I think that also becomes, once again, another trope where the demon knows stuff about the living people, right?
I mean, this movie invented the demonic possession genre.
It is the demonic possession genre.
Like every single like you can't not borrow from it.
It has the name. It is the genre, The Exorcist, right? And then every other Exorcist movie is just, or exorcism movie. It's like, well, you think of this one first.
So she's tormenting Karras and just saying awful things to him, and then you can tell it's starting to get to him. And then her body just raises off the bed, slowly levitates way up in the air above her bed. And it's another flawless effect.
Yeah, everything gets quiet and slows down, and it just happens, and you're just forced to watch it in anticipation of wondering what's going to happen next.
When she comes back down and she strikes Karras, knocking him to the floor, and then the room starts shaking like they're in an earthquake. And Marin, who's old and frail, he kind of falls to the ground. And when they look up, again, in another just unbelievably framed and shot scene, you have fully demonic Reagan reaching for the sky, and her image is superimposed of the statue of the demon that Marin saw in Iraq, and it's just unbelievably creepy. It's one of the most iconic shots of the movie.
And it's right there. It's right there. They don't even try to make it subliminal, even though that statue and the white-faced demon is subliminal throughout the whole movie. Mm-hmm. Then we finally get the reveal that it's right there, and it's still creepy.
Yeah, and it's lit with red, and she's kind of a shadow imposed in front of it. It's beautifully put together.
Yeah,
so impactful. The priests decide they're going to take a break, like they got to rest, regather themselves. Yeah. Marin takes a nitro pill. We know he has a bad heart. So when they go back in, Karras sees his mom in the bed. It's no longer Reagan. It's his mom's body. And she's speaking to him in his mom's heavy Italian voice.
Yeah.
And he's getting very upset.
He won't even look at her. Yeah, he has his back to her, and he's like trying to deny it.
So it's playing mind games with him and winning.
Yeah, and right before they went in there, there's a great line where he's basically saying, what it's trying to do is introduce the possibility that God doesn't love us, and that's all it has to do is give us that idea that it's possible that God doesn't love us. That's why we need a break, because we can't let this thing get in our heads like that. And then as soon as he says that, Damien goes in there and then has this issue, and like it's just continuously attacking their faith.
Yeah. So Marin sends Karras out of the room to gather himself, and he ends up speaking with Chris. And he's kind of down, and you can see, his faith was weak going in, which probably wasn't the best formula. But they have a great conversation, and Chris desperately just simply asked him, "Is my baby girl going to die?" And you can see like a heroic rise of his faith inside of him, where he kind of lifts himself up and he looks at her and he's like, "No." And you see him head back into the room with a renewed determination to take this thing on. I thought that was, again, great acting. It wasn't over the top. It wasn't,
right.
He wasn't Hulk Hogan coming back from a beating. It was subtle, but you could see, how much this meant. And this wasn't just his faith. This meant the survival of this girl and this family. So he was going to do everything he could, which it was really well executed.
Yeah, it's sacrificial to himself, and it's the hero's journey. It's his own redemption arc, and he's saving someone else at the same time.
So he returns to the room, and Marin is dead, slumped over the bed, and Regan is calmly sitting up in the bed, laughing. She's sitting there like she would be knitting or watching television.
And one thing I love,
casual.
Yeah, one thing I really love about the scene is like Linda Blair's character, like she's like sitting there almost like puzzled and like looking at like what's and then all of a sudden when Damien comes over, like she starts to slowly laugh and like grin. Right. And it was just, I think that juxtaposition of both of those emotions coming in, like it's radical.
Like what have I done here?
Yeah, but then all of a sudden becomes this grin. It's like this movie's so evil.
So Karras is now over the top. He grabs her, and he smacks it, and he throws it to the floor, and he's wrestling it, and he's slamming it to the floor, striking it, and he yells at it to take me instead. And again, another trope. But we see the demon accept this invitation. What greater conquest for an agent of Satan than to take over the body of a priest?
Yeah.
And we see him, and we see his eyes change, and we see transformation in his face very quickly. And Karras stands up, possessed by this demon, but enough in control that he jumps out that fateful window and tumbles down those long, long steps.
Yep.
And we hear Regan's voice in the room crying, "Mommy." And Regan is released. Father Karras is in a bloody heap at the bottom of the steps below the window. And the nightmare is over. We get some wrap up. We see Chris and Regan move out. They're packing up. The girl mercifully doesn't remember any of it. But there's a priest who was a friend of Karras's, who was also a friend of Chris's. That's how they kind of initially met.
Mm-hmm.
And he's there seeing them off. And for no reason other than some deep understanding, Regan gives him a kiss on the cheek as they leave.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Like it was some subconscious understanding that she knew, like, this was a favorable person that was looking after her, right?
Yeah. Again, we touched on it. This is one of, if it's not number one, it's in the top 3 horror movies ever made. It's impactful. It's groundbreaking. It stands the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
Every single category you look at, acting, cinematography, direction, special effects, it checks every box. It packs an emotional punch like very few movies of any kind, forget horror movies, achieve. It was nominated for Academy Award, which was unheard of for horror movies. Should have won.
Yeah.
And they did not yet have the special effect Academy Award, or there's no question that Dick Smith would have won.
It was nominated for Best Picture.
Yes.
It was the first horror movie to ever be nominated for Best Picture, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just groundbreaking stuff.
And that's, I mean, as vulgar as the movie was, as much as it shocked people, even the Academy couldn't like deny how great the movie was. Like, yeah, I mean, because you don't see a lot of vulgar movies like that getting Academy Awards. They usually just kind of go for more like, like esoteric stuff. And yeah, this movie, as gory as it was at that time, they even had to give it a nomination. That's impressive.
Yeah, I think 20 years later, we get Silence of the Lambs winning all the major
All five.
awards about
Yeah.
a cannibal who skins a man in the middle of the movie, and like that probably doesn't happen if not for the recognition that was afforded these types of films, starting with this movie.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
All-time classic. All right. Our second film under the category Demonic Daughters is Pet Semetary from 2019, directed by Kevin Kolch and Dennis Widmeyer. And while any movie that we were going to talk about in the same episode with The Exorcist was probably going to pale in comparison, I think this movie is underrated, and we actually covered this movie in our list of remakes that don't suck. What's your thoughts on this film?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it's a good adaptation of the book. Considering it's only an hour and a half long, I think it could have ran longer, in my opinion. It could have paced properly. It could have been a 2-hour movie. There's a lot to be utilized out of this book for a movie. You can tell why they made certain decisions as far as like changing the story for time's sake, for not having to delve into other subplots. I think the movie feels a bit rushed, but it does have a good story, and I like how they utilize a lot of the dialogue from the book.
I think they did two things in this movie that were good. Although I love the book, huge fan of the book, read it when I was a teenager.
Same. Yeah, I love it.
I actually liked the change of making it Ellie instead of Gage. And the reason I like, if you're going to remake a movie and you're going to do the exact same thing that's already been done, I always wonder what's the point. Ellie is older, smarter, and more dangerous of a character. Not that, creepy little Gage running around in the first one isn't impactful. I just thought it was a nice change.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing they did was, with changes like that, they kind of played with the audience's expectations. Gage runs to the road and everybody thinks, oh no. Or there's a scene when Judd is walking in his bedroom and they keep showing his heel because something happens under the bed in the first one, and they keep showing that same heel for audience expectations of that exact same thing to happen, but then they change it up. So I kind of liked how they played with what we expected a little bit, and I think this movie's very creepy.
It is, and it's well casted too. I think the acting's well done. John Lithgow for Judd, I think, was phenomenal choice. He brings a lot of charisma to that character. I think Rachel does a good job of selling her trauma that she had with her sister and kind of bring that to light in the forefront, and almost kind of making you forget that this other thing is going to be happening. And this is going to sound silly, but like even the cat, like the fact that they got like church to do all the things they get them to do instead of having it all be CGI. I thought that was, little things like that add touches to the movie that I think it's a fun watch.
Yeah. So the Creed family moves into a house in rural Maine, relocating from Boston. It's a beautiful property, but we quickly discover the road out front. It's a state route, a rural road, but it has really fast-moving tractor trailers. And that kind of it lays that groundwork very, very quickly.
Yeah, which is well done because like you said, you see them coming. They have them flying by in like one of the opening scenes, so you get that right away. Like it's a peaceful setting. The family's coming in, and then whoosh, you get the truck rushing right by. So it kind of like lets the audience know right off the bat.
The sound design, they're having a conversation. All of a sudden, the noise of that truck is instantly like jacked up to 11, and it's like it's almost like a jump scare.
I was gonna say almost like a jump scare, yeah, but it's kind of like it's the rifle on the wall.
Yeah. And of course, most people watching this probably know the story. So it's like, all right, what can you do with what we know and our expectations to still entertain us?
Yeah.
The wife Rachel and the daughter Ellie see a procession of kids in animal masks, burying a dog in a pet cemetery behind their house. And the kids are, again, they're creepy. The masks are creepy. The way they march without words, with the wheelbarrow and the dead animal, it's just creepy.
They make it seem demonic, and so it makes the audience kind of sit back and wonder what's going on with it. But then Judd later comes in and says, "No, this is kind of what the neighborhood does. It's not bad. It's just kind of paying homage." And so again, it's subverting the audience's expectations with that.
Ellie sneaks off to explore the pet cemetery, and there's a section that's walled off by wood and brush, and it's a huge mountain that you're designed not to climb over. And she starts to climb it, and this is where we meet Judd, the old man neighbor who stops her. And as she's getting down, she falls and skins her knee, or she gets stung by a bee.
Yeah, which is kind of true to the book, right? Because Gage gets stung by a bee, and then Judd comes over. Yeah.
He pulls the stinger out and pecks a little mud on it. And the mother shows up and takes her home and says, you can't run off like that. And here's where we first start seeing flashbacks to Rachel dealing with her sister as a child. And I struggle with this a little bit because the sister's very creepy. Her name's Zelda, for one. Just a hint, if you're going to name your daughter Zelda, she's destined to be creepy. I just don't recommend it. The only other Zelda I know is the actress who played the person in Poltergeist who says, "This house is clean." Sweet little lady, but you can't tell me she's not creepy.
Yeah, and Robin Williams' daughter, I believe.
Oh, her, I don't know.
I don't know that either. Yeah,
But Zelda's just like an odd name for a girl, for a kid of any type.
Yeah, it's a very 1930s name.
But she's crippled with spinal meningitis. So she's very creepy and monstrous and scary. And she's just a poor girl afflicted with this awful disease.
Yeah.
There's really nothing scary about her, but they sure present her scary.
Yeah.
I was torn with that a little bit. Like, should this poor girl also be this frightening, almost John Merrick in The Elephant Man? I saw that as a very young kid. And while I sympathized with the story, I was still scared every time he was on screen.
Right. What I think they're trying to do is it's Rachel's young mind perceiving it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that's how they were trying to come across. Like I said, the movie's only an hour and a half, so it feels rushed at some points. Whereas, like, they probably could have taken time to have scenes with like the parents with Zelda, where she looks and it's just kind of like afflicted normal, but then Rachel as a child sees it differently, right? And they could have had that contrast, but it feels rushed with a lot of the stuff they do.
When they show her as a very young child left alone with her sick sister, trying to feed her or bring her food, my first thought was, where the hell are these parents?
Right.
Why would you leave a girl this young in this situation?
Yeah.
So the bad guys of that scenario, to me, are not the poor girl afflicted with spinal meningitis. Yes, she may be twisted but she has an awful disease. The parents are the bad people here. That's my opinion.
Right. Well, that's also, again, I know we're reviewing the movie, but in the book that's addressed, I think, later on when she brings that up, like, why would you leave me alone with her? Right. Yeah. And the parents are like, what do you mean? Yeah. So Yep. The movie doesn't address it,
Lewis Creed is a doctor, and he's got a new job at a clinic, and he thinks, I'm in the rural country. This is going to be easy. It's going to be, nosebleeds.
I'm not doing the graveyard shift at the ER, right? I'm working at a university with kids, and there's nosebleeds, like you said, and it's going to be easy.
And right away, a teenager gets hit and dragged by a car and is brought in gushing blood. His face is half torn off. So he has this awful traumatic thing, just like he would have in Boston.
ER. Yeah.
Happen immediately. And the boy dies, but sits up and speaks to him in his mind.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, like you talked about, Rachel, there's a lot of parts of this movie that are things playing on the adults' minds.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost like in their minds or premonitions. Yeah.
Almost like you moved into this house that contains this spiritually haunted, somewhat evil land, and it's seeping through.
Like it's this Yeah, like it's this atmosphere they've been dipped into, and now it's they're infected by it.
Judd comes to dinner, and he starts to get close to the family. Becomes real neighborly. He's a widower, so he's by himself. But he takes a shine to Ellie. He even likes the cat church. But on Halloween, he calls Lewis out to the road, and they find Church dead on the side of the road. And there's a little bit of a they don't go deep into it, but there's a little bit of a religious drama between the two parents, where Rachel keeps telling Ellie about, so and so's in heaven and they're looking down on us, and Lewis is being a doctor and being more scientific, is like, we don't know that, what, she's old enough, we should start telling her the truth, type of stuff. And you kind of see this ideological disagreement between them.
Yeah, and it's actually it's a good parallel to The Exorcist, what we just discussed. There's this scientific and faith-based underpinnings between the characters, and trying to come to grips with both of them, right? Like, Lewis is gonna try to come. He's a scientific mind who's gonna try to come to grips with how do you deal with like grief and loss and death, and then Rachel's trying to do the same thing, but she's doing it from a faith-based, and it kind of collides.
Mm-hmm. And they don't go deep down that road, but they touch on it.
It's thematic, throughout the movie.
In their discussion of death, this is where Rachel reveals the story of she was supposed to bring her sister dinner, and she was afraid, so she scented up the dumbwaiter that she was not supposed to use, and her sister tried to get it and fell down the dumbwaiter to her death. So it's her fault, and she's haunted by it, and that haunting seems to take everything about that scenario and make it creepier.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's she's been manifested in her mind as not a sick sister, but almost this demonic presence because of the grief and the guilt she feels from what happened.
And it's become this like apparition or this phantasma in her life. She can't get over it.
That night, Judd and Lewis go to bury Church. They decided they're just going to tell her Church ran off. So Lewis kind of loses that argument. And Judd says, Ellie's really going to be sad about Church. Yeah. Like, well, you don't really want her to be sad, do you? And then he's like, follow me. And he takes him over the wall to the secret burial place. And they climb and they walk, and they're going through swamps, and there's these almost mist-like creatures making huge noises off in the distance. There's lightning. It's almost like it crossed into a different plane of existence, right?
Yeah.
They go up these large stone steps, and he says, you gotta do it. Bury it here, stack the rocks on top, and that's it.
Yep.
And I guess this should have dawned on me sooner, but upon rewatching this, I was so mad at Judd. I'm like, this whole thing is your fault.
Yeah.
And you wonder, does this mystical place have a pull that makes you want to do it?
Well, he says later that it does, right?
Yeah.
He says it gives you the sweet reminders that you have to keep coming back, and I don't know why it does it, right? He says it when they're having a drink later.
Yeah. So in the morning, they go and they're telling Ellie that Churches ran off, and she's like, no, he's not. He's right there. He's in my closet. And they open the door, and Church hisses, and we see right away he's different. He's angry. He's aggressive. He smells funny.
He's hissing and growling.
He's got matted fur from he was
the
run
dry
over by a
blood
truck.
and dirt. And yeah.
He rips apart a bird on the parents' bed, just tearing it apart right on their bed.
I thought that was a pretty gnarly scene. I thought it was cool that they put it in. Like, they're kind of making out, kind of being intimate, and then all of a sudden she freaks out, and like there's the cat with the dead bird right there, and she's like, "That thing's still alive," and like
she's ripping it apart.
Yeah, it's a good scene.
Yeah, that'd be the end of the cat right there for me. The truck didn't do it.
Get me the 12 gauge.
So Rachel is now distraught, and she goes into the bathroom and she hallucinates her dead sister coming out of the medicine cabinet. She opens the medicine cabinet, and inside is the opening of the dumbwaiter. So she hallucinates that, and it's really having an effect on her. Church goes in and is actually in the crib trying to hurt Gage. So Lewis takes it out. He wants to kill it, but decides he can't, and instead drives it off into the woods and leaves it.
Yep.
Kind of the abandoned animal syndrome.
Yeah, and then they have that shot of Church just kind of sitting there looking at the car, and like the cat's almost kind of like, "Where do you think you're going, pal?"
Yeah,
I'll be
like
back.
the cat squints his eyes like he's pissed.
Yeah.
He's like Clint Eastwood all of a sudden. He's just just squinting at the guy like, you're done for now, dude.
Yeah, Church actually had character in this movie. It was funny.
We moved to Ellie's birthday party. Friends and family come in from Boston. And we see Church walking down the middle of the road. And Ellie runs out to him. And we see Gage following her. And Gage is running into the road. And then we see the huge truck barreling down. And this is where we start to, what we think we know about this story changes, because Lewis runs and pulls Gage out of the way. But in doing so, the truck loses control. Guy jerks the wheel. The truck turns over and slides down the road, wiping out Ellie.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's a great twist.
Yeah, it's awful. It's handled delicately. They don't show her mangled body. She's off in the ditch, but it's touching enough where you really feel the impact as much as you can from a movie of a parent losing a child.
Yeah. I watched this with my friend, and she gasped like at that point. So it has that gasping like moment right there.
At the funeral, after the funeral, Rachel takes Gage and they go back to Boston with her awful parents, who I don't forgive for what they did. And Lewis brings drinks over to Judd, and they're sitting around a fire, and he drugs him, because at the funeral they looked at each other and they kind of shared a moment, and Judd knew what Lewis must be thinking, and was definitely going to try to talk him out of it.
Yeah.
Even though you introduced this into their lives.
Right. Yeah.
So he knocks him out. He goes and he exhumes Ellie's body, and he takes her to the secret burial ground. And sure enough, he wakes up in the morning the next day. She's home, and her eyes are messed up. One's like bigger than the other, more open.
Slanted.
It's almost like the old toys where the eyes googled when you pulled it on the string.
Yeah.
Her eyes are googled, and her voice is deeper.
Her skin has that, like, it's like zombie like,
that gray, sallow, effect to it.
Yeah, with like really dark under the eyes and the hair. Like, it's just obvious when you look at it, like, this girl's dead. Like,
he bathes her, and he's trying to brush her hair, and it's all matted, just like Church's fur.
It's starting to come out. Yeah.
And he's like ripping at it, and she's like completely emotionless. Then you see the staples down the back of her skull that were put in before the funeral. And it's like, okay, dude, this is not going to work.
Right. It's a pretty intense scene. Yeah. Because it's a realization of what he did.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And the next scene, so he cleans her up as best he can. And then we find her, she put her dirty burial dress that's covered in mud that she was in the ground with. She puts it back on, and she's ballet dancing or ballerina dancing throughout the living room. And it's pretty creepy.
And she's like smashing stuff on the floor. And I would have been like, where'd you get that? Because I burned it. But apparently he still kept it.
Yeah. She's breaking things. It's just like Church. It's clear she's not the same.
That's right. Something else is going on.
Judd sees her through the window and gets scared. And he goes home and he locks his doors and he gets his gun and he hears noises upstairs. And this is where he goes upstairs and he's lurking around looking for something. And they keep showing his heels under the bed. And in the original movie, this is where Gage has the straight razor and slices his Achilles. So they keep showing it like, hey, this is what's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, which I kind of liked.
Well, yeah, they do that throughout the movie, like you said, and it's well done.
He starts to go down the stairs, and Church is at the top of the stairs and hisses, and he stops and turns around, and reaching through the banister, this is where Ellie slices his Achilles, and he tumbles down the steps.
Yeah,
and it was just a nice little switch.
Nice twist. Yeah.
And again, Ellie's older, smarter, stronger,
taller. She's not a Chucky doll, right? Yeah.
That when I see Gage, I think of the Chucky doll. Honestly,
right. You could pick him up and punt him, like, get out of here.
That's why Chucky doesn't scare me. If Chucky runs at me, I am kicking him so far,
throwing him out the window.
Yeah, exactly. Again, and I'm not disparaging the original. I do think the original's a better movie.
Yeah,
I just think
but still conceptually, right?
Yeah. She's more intimidating because she knows a lot more.
Right.
So she then torments him as his dead wife, saying things, looking like her all of a sudden, and it's almost like we just saw in The Exorcist, where Father Karras is suddenly talking to his Italian mother. Judd is now talking to his deceased wife, and being tormented before she attacks with the knife and just stabs him over and over until he's dead.
Yeah, and that was a cool effect too.
Yeah. Rachel can't get a hold of Lewis. She's worried, so she starts driving back home. She arrives home, and she's there confronting Lewis, and Ellie walks in. And can you imagine what that would feel like from the grief and trauma she just went through, and then there's your daughter standing there?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have a heart attack or stroke. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Now, this story was so dark when Stephen King wrote it. He put it in his drawer and left it there for several years.
Yeah,
because he had I think his son Owen, and the whole thing, Gage was based on Owen, and it freaked him out.
Yeah, when I read the book, I put it down and thought about it for a while. I was just, no different than him. Like it's really heavy book. It deals with a lot of grief and death and loss and aging, and it does it from multiple people's perspectives, from different ages. It's a really heavy book.
Yeah. So Rachel is not on board. Lewis at this point tells her everything. He confesses the whole thing, tells her about the burial grounds, tells her about church, tells her about Ellie. He says, we have another chance. We have our daughter back. And she's not on board with this. She can, like the viewer, you can look at Ellie and say, nah, that's not right.
Right.
So she takes Gage and she goes upstairs. Ellie is mad about being rejected by her mother. She tried to hug her, and Lewis is like, hug your daughter, Rachel, hug your daughter. And she doesn't want no part of it. Right. So Ellie's really mad about being rejected.
Yeah. And then Ellie says, well, I don't want her here. Yeah, like after she walks away, real evil.
Yeah. Rachel locks herself in the bedroom and Gage is in there. And I don't know if this is a dream, but my first thought was, because it's kind of played off like a dream, she imagines that she's in bed, crippled like her sister, and her sister is stalking her, like the roles have reversed.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't imagine you just experienced that and went upstairs and went to sleep.
No.
So it might be a waking nightmare type of thing, complete hallucination. I wrote down dream, but I'm thinking there's no way this woman just went to bed after what she just saw and experienced.
Right.
And she wakes up, or she comes out of her hallucination with Ellie attacking her with a knife. She manages to get to the window and drops Gage safely down to Lewis before Ellie stabs her in the back. And then she proceeds to torment her about her sister, saying that it was her fault, saying she's going to hell. And then she kills her. Lewis put Gage in the car, and he tries to intervene and save Rachel, save his wife.
Mm-hmm.
But she knocks him out. And then we see Ellie somehow incredibly strong, drag her mother to the burial site.
Dragging her right out there. Well, I mean, she's possessed demonically, right? So it doesn't even matter like how big she is. It's just possessed by this Wendigo.
Yeah. Lewis finally comes through and he follows. He knows where they're headed. He gets there and Ellie tells him it's too late. And they start fighting. And Lewis gets control. He gets on top of her. He's got the shovel and he's about to behead her. He's about to give her a Day of the Dead treatment with the shovel through the head.
Yep.
And as he's about to do it, he gets impaled from behind by the regenerated Rachel.
Yeah.
And the two girls then bury him. This whole time, Gage is in the car. He's basically sitting in his car seat alone in the car.
Just a little 2-year-old.
Yep. Just hanging out. And at dawn, the whole family walks out of the woods, walks towards young Gage sitting in the car alone.
Yep. And the dad just kind of knocks on the window and Gage looks and he kind of smiles at him and that's how they end it. It's really creepy.
I thought it was a really good ending.
I did too. I actually really liked the ending.
It's twisted.
I sat back. I was like, "Oh no!" I was like, "Oh no!"
Yeah,
the dad's gonna get the kid.
It's demented.
He's bury his kid alive or something. Like,
it's not exactly what you expected or what you were thinking was coming.
Yeah.
I thought it was an effective twist end.
I agree 100%. I think it's a great ending. Great ending for what they could have done with this movie, and they did it well.
Yeah. Again, not an all-time classic film, but I think underrated as far as remakes go. I like that they changed some things. I like that they did some things different and very worthwhile watch.
If you haven't seen it, it's a fun Friday night popcorn movie. You know what I mean? Like it's not the greatest movie ever, but it's very enjoyable.
I do think it's funny how you and I describe horrific movies as fun and a good time, but I guess that says more about us than the film.
Well, that's why we talk about. Yeah, I mean, these are my favorite movies. If I'm going to pick a movie, these are the movies I want to watch. Right? I'm not. Yeah.
I totally agree with you, but then you think about
what we're saying.
This whole family's been dead and buried and regenerated.
Fun movie.
It's a fun movie. Yeah. Well, that's why we're not called the Weekly Drama Scope or Comedy Scope. So
exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, that is our show this week for Demented Daughters. Two very good, really good films, including one all-time classic, maybe the best horror movie ever made. But a lot of fun. And don't assume your daughters are all sugars and spice and everything nice. There might be some twisted in there, so be careful.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's our show. We appreciate you listening or watching. As always, I'm Jerry. That's Matt, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.